we make the assumption that they choose not to control their behavior. I believe this is almost never the case. It's very rare that a child purposefully chooses to be a booger. Hello, welcome to the Chirp YouTube channel. My name is Christy and I am your friendly online speech-language pathologist and specialist in children's communication development, which includes behavior because behavior is one type of communication. I am here to update you on how my last week with my students went using some advanced behavior strategies, actually not that advanced, and to talk about what to do when a child can't, won't, or doesn't do what you wish he or she were doing. First of all, let's talk about can't, won't, doesn't, because these are three different areas of behavior management inside of a child. Can't means a child does not have the skills to do what you want her to do. Won't means a child refuses to do what you want. And doesn't could mean either of those things. We just aren't sure yet exactly why a child isn't doing something. When I say doing something, most of the time I'm talking about something like joining the class in story time, or participating in an art activity, or perhaps interacting with other students. These are things that we kind of expect kids to just be able to do, but sometimes they can't, they won't, or they just don't do these things. And what do we do as the adults when children do not, or cannot, or will not? In my class, I have a few students who cannot do certain things, and that's pretty easy for me to assess, I think, usually. But I have a couple of newer students who I assumed had an issue with won't. They would not do the things I wanted them to do. One little student in particular, and today I'm going to pick the name Connor. Now, Connor is at an age where developmentally, if he were developing typically, he would be able to participate in the kinds of things I'm talking about, relate socially with other students in a safe and healthy way, have fun with other students. He would be able to handle the normal hustle and bustle of a classroom. He would not resist everything all the time and say no to everything. And so in my mind, this became obstinate behavior. This became oppositional behavior. Instead of assuming that this was a can't problem, I assumed it was a won't problem. Now, I'm not here to tell you that it's not a won't problem and that instead it is a can't problem. But as time goes and as I have been learning more about Connor, I have been learning that he has more challenges internally to himself than I thought. He has shown some motor delays that really shocked me. I did not expect them because he presents as such a physically typical child, and yet I have discovered that he is not. Also, I have discovered that loud noises are much more upsetting to him than I originally knew. This last week, we had some headphones on him, and his behavior was much more manageable. This is kind of a surprise to me because he does not present as a child with sensory challenges. Please watch my sensory series right here, where you will learn lots more about the 9 currently recognized different sensory modalities and the different needs that our students can have in each of those areas. It's very helpful for understanding some of the sensory issues that can affect our children and their behavior. I did not perceive that Connor was having difficulties in these areas. It just seemed to me that he was very angry all the time and took it out on us and other students, and that he refused to do anything, pretty much, and in the normal routine. Because I'm noticing these things now as I'm getting to know him better, I'm beginning to think that this is a can't problem rather than a won't problem. And this does change how I approach the problem and how I feel emotionally about this child. It shouldn't, it feels to me, because even students who are in the won't category, they won't do things. This is not just a bad child. It's not a bad seed. It's a child who has experienced trauma, perhaps, a child who has experienced neglect, a child who experienced a great deal of fear while still in the womb, or perhaps exposure to toxins while in the womb or after birth. Children do not come out of the womb bad. All children come out of the womb with brilliant ability to blossom. And sometimes things happen that cause a child to fall into the won't category, where they naturally say no to almost everything. And as I discussed in last week's video, this oftentimes comes across as something that gets diagnosed as an oppositional defiant disorder. However, there are lots of problems with this as a diagnosis. I recommend reading this book and watching that video summary that I did of the book. I probably need to do a new one because that one's a few years old. Because there are ways of helping these kids. There are ways of helping them. And we don't want to slot a child into a category that means that we don't provide support to them. Yes, there are children who need a lot of boundaries and children who potentially need different learning environments. And we don't want to just assume that they are naughty children, because the likelihood is they have missing skills. Because every child who doesn't do what we want has some sort of missing skill. Sometimes it's a communication skill. Sometimes it's a social skill. And sometimes it's behavioral skills. They cannot control their behavior and their responses. And we make the assumption that they choose not to control their behavior. I believe this is almost never the case. It's very rare that a child purposefully chooses to be a booger. Most of the time, something happens to the child in the child's environment that makes it much more difficult for that child to manage herself. So, what did I do in my classroom with Connor and the other students who have very challenging behavior? I did not push them so hard. Before we opened my specialized classroom, these kids were in the typical population in our church children's program. Because they all have some behavioral and developmental differences, I pretty much did not push them very hard because I did not want to cause any magnifying of behaviors. I didn't want any meltdowns to happen. I didn't want these kids to get loud. I didn't want them to be a distraction. So I had a lot of equipment with me in my small group. Now, this is a larger group of children in a larger room, and I took it upon myself that my job was pretty much to keep my kids with different learning styles and different behavioral management strategies, to keep them from being a distraction as much as possible. And as a secondary goal for myself would be that they would actually participate in some way or potentially actually learn something. But that was a stretch most weeks. Most weeks it was about keeping everyone calm. And I did a really good job at this. I had a lot of different equipment. I can do a different video about that. Different activities and quiet play toys that I allowed them to do throughout the entire service, the entire hour and a half that we had. They were allowed to color. They were allowed to play Legos. They were allowed to play Connects, as long as they weren't making noise, as long as they weren't getting up and running around or harming other children. They were allowed to do whatever they needed to do to keep themselves calm. When I noticed anyone ramping up, I would swoop in and I would offer a wobble cushion or a different activity that they could do that would help them to stay calm. And it was very successful. However, I wanted more for these children than just to shut up and sit down. And hopefully it was always more than that, because they knew they were loved, they knew they were welcome, and I was adapting lessons on the fly so that they could understand and we could discuss them at a different level from the other kids. But I still wanted more. I wanted to be able to teach with a curriculum specifically written for kids with different learning styles. You can find out more about that right there. I wanted to have a classroom where they could be themselves, where they could not have to be quiet all the time, but also where they learned to follow a classroom routine. And that's where the challenge began, because once we came into a separate classroom and I have a schedule that I follow and that I expect the students to follow, a couple of my students fell apart a little bit, and they started doing much worse than they had in the big classroom where they were allowed to do whatever they wanted the whole time, as long as it was quiet. And I realized that for probably about half of them, my expectations were too high. When I started this new classroom, I expected they would be able to follow my schedule, to have the free play time at the beginning, and then our music time, and then our story time, and then our art time, and then our time where we talk to God all together, and then some more free play time at the end. And we usually focus heavily on the free play time because this is great opportunity for social interaction. It's great opportunity for fun and for reinforcing that our classroom is a really fun place to come and build relationships with the kids, us as adults with the kids, but also the kids with each other. We want them to have friends when they come to church. Or when they go anywhere, we want them to have these skills so that they can build relationships. And it was not working out for a while because my expectations for a few of these kids were too high. They are not yet capable of agreeing to participate in so many structured activities where they have to do something they don't want to do. And because of the kind of program that we run, and because of what I talked about last week, we cannot force children to participate in things that they don't want to do. Once they get to a certain age, especially when children are 2, we put them in the bathtub because they need to take a bath. And that's where behavior management begins, is when children are itty bitty, and you can, if they don't want to eat, you put them in their high chair and you put food in front of them and they realize, oh yeah, I do like mangoes, so I'm going to eat. When children are 10, it is too late to be doing that kind of management, that kind of behavior management, which is sad. But there are 10-year-old children who are too big for me to protect myself against if they decide to be aggressive. So my plan was, and I discussed this in last week's video, I am going to give them a buffet of options to choose from during times they do not wish to participate with the rest of the class. And I'm going to see if this keeps behavior calm, because my number one concern is keeping everyone safe and calm. No one can learn if we are dysregulated. We only can learn and participate and build relationships if we are calm. And keeping them calm needs to be my number one priority for my own sanity, for all of my volunteer safety, and for the kids as well. The rest of the kids can't learn. If I have 2 or 3 kids running around like maniacs, that's not going to work, because it's not great. So, as I mentioned in last week's video, I gathered together a bunch of quiet activities that I thought would be appealing to these particular students, and I gave them a hierarchy of options. First of all, where would you like to have story? At the big table or on the floor? And Connor just gave me this look. And so I said, okay, no story. Would you like to play puzzle, or would you like to color instead? And he did not choose any of those. And I went to the third tier and I said, okay, none of those. Would you like to do this, or would you like to do this? And I gave him a couple of other options. And he didn't choose any of those either. He was just mad, or so it seemed to me. And he wanted to look in the cabinet and go shopping for another activity. Usually I do not let kids go shopping in my cabinets because they take forever, they don't make good choices, and they pick things I don't want them to be doing during that time. But usually I say, what would you like out of the cabinet? I will get it for you. But I've noticed that Connor has difficulty telling me what he wants. I'm beginning to wonder if there's more of a communication delay there than I thought. I know he has a sibling who definitely has some communication challenges. And these things do often run in families for one reason or another. So I let him shop in my cabinet. And he picked something, and he was able to be quiet with that for a short period of time. But then, once I got through my story time with my other 4 students who were all able to learn during this time, I had 2 who were doing one thing and 4 who were at the big table with me, and I was able to actually teach the lesson and do the motor activity, which was our art for the week, and build rapport with them, talk to them in a quiet environment without a lot of racket from children who were out of control. So this worked really well. And after about 5 minutes maybe, Connor and the other student who were doing an alternate activity started to sort of bicker, and so I picked out some puzzle games, the one I showed you last week, and I have multiple of these so they each can play with a different set, and they did that for the next probably 5 minutes. And 10 minutes is all I need to get through the story and to get most of the craft activity done so that the other students have the attention that they need during that time to enjoy time with the teacher and to learn something and to make something. And I felt like this was the most successful week that we have had yet. Not only did everyone stay calm, I mean, if you had walked in on our classroom, there were still loud moments, and there were still moments where someone was yelling or doing something that maybe wasn't ideal. But for the most part, it was quiet, it was calm. Everyone came happy and left happy. In fact, a couple of our little kids whined because they didn't want to leave, This is a win for everyone. And I had 3 comments from families. That was 3 like this, but it looked like this. It was actually 3. 3 comments from family members about how grateful they are that we have pulled these kids outside of the typical programming because their kids weren't enjoying it, were overwhelmed by the loudness and the busyness, and the lessons are over everyone's head, typically, even over the typical kids' heads, which is frustrating. But I feel like everyone was calm. I got to actually teach. There weren't any really super challenging behaviors, and I got a lot of positive feedback this week. So it was a great week. And I'm here to encourage you that even if you feel like you're letting kids off the hook by letting them do alternate activities, by not forcing them to do what you want them to be doing at any particular time, you are doing the children a service by not pushing them so hard, because they probably can't do what you're expecting of them. And that is probably why you're seeing the behavior that you're seeing. And I'm here to tell the story, not only from a behavior specialist standpoint, having dealt with behavior for 25 years, behavior related to developmental differences, but also from a fellow educator who is working through this in real life. It does work. And over time, we're going to see rewards from this because these children are calm. They're going to realize we are not as much of a threat as they thought. We are not going to force them into things they don't want to do. And therefore, the things that we are doing aren't going to seem so threatening either. And eventually, I predict, they are going to join us in story time, in our art activity. And they're going to be able to stay calm longer through that process also. I will keep you informed about that. But just to wrap up this video, don't push them so hard. Make the assumption they cannot do what you think they should be able to do, and offer them an alternative. Help them stay calm in whatever way you can. Obviously, they can't stay calm by hurting others, by ripping up your books, by biting themselves. If someone is not safe, then obviously we need a different solution. And in my situation, that's going to involve calling the parents or other family members, whoever's the contact person. But in most cases, letting go of the expectations that I have of the child, backing off and letting the child be who she is, instead of having such high expectations, instead of trying to get my vision met of what she should be doing or how my classroom should look, I need to be more flexible too, as the child is learning to be more flexible. That is my word of encouragement for this week. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you do, helping kids or raising kids or just learning about kids. I appreciate it. I want to make this world a much more welcoming and understanding place for kids, especially those who have developmental and behavioral differences. So, thank you for your part in that. We can be a team. See you soon. Bye.